Welcome back, everybody. So Superman recently came out, and also Ben Shapiro made a video talking about how it's going woke. Color me surprised. So let's see how uselessly petty he is about the whole thing. Now this video is going to be a little different and shorter than what I usually do here. I'd started it as kind of an off-the-cuff thing for my extracurricular channel. Go check that out if you want. But it ended up getting a little more involved, so I thought I'd just throw it here and see how it goes. See if people like mixing it up a little bit. Also, obviously, I'm trying a different setup, sitting a little further back from my camera, so let me know if you like that any better. I may keep it up depending on how much trouble it is and whether it seems worth it or not. So I hope you enjoy this, even though you have to see Ben Shapiro's face and listen to his voice while he talks.
Now, in much, much lighter news, I just wanted to comment on the fact Superman is coming out this week. So, of course, this is much lighter news. Superman, the new movie from James Gunn. I've been a little skeptical of it because I think that James Gunn, he's fine for Guardians of the Galaxy, but Superman is a more serious property.
Serious? I don't know, I guess. Maybe in that it doesn't have the overtly comical elements of Guardians of the Galaxy. But still, it's a story about a guy in tights and a cape who flies around saving people. And the tone of the property's kind of been all over the place. Just like the way it is with most comics, right? So I think Ben's coming off as a little bit of an overly serious fan bro. Unless, he's just posing as an overly serious fan bro to establish the pretense of interest in anything other than being petty over politics.
The reason that it's relevant politically is because when we talk about the left and the left in the media, and then we talk about the left in Hollywood, the level of out-of-touchness with the everyday American is truly insane, truly crazy.
Great. So the left is out of touch with everyday America thing. Coming from a professional debate bro who spends his life on podcasts and going around trying to gotcha college students. But whatever. We know what this is. This is just a standard right-wing script for trying to discredit anything on the left, for his own audience, so they just don't have to think about them and their perspectives or anything like that. This is older than time. It goes back to at least Rush Limbaugh on the radio. I remember that from when I was, kind of a right-wing asshole teenager.
So James Gunn did an interview at the Times of London, and he was talking about the themes in Superman. And he explained that the superhero epic encompasses the story of America. He said, Superman is the story of America, an immigrant that came from other places and populated the country. But for me, it is mostly a story that says basic human kindness is a value and is something that we have lost. So he's now trying to make the case effectively that Superman is kind of an illegal immigrant.
Did Gunn say illegal immigrant? I sure don't think I heard that. But let's go back and listen just in case.
He said, Superman is the story of America, an immigrant that came from other places and populated the country. But for me, it is mostly a story that says basic human kindness is a value and is something that we have lost.
Nope, he sure did not say illegal immigrants. Now, to be as fair as humanly possible to Ben, which is something that's hard to do, I know, I could maybe see reading between the lines, considering that illegal immigration and how we respond to it is kind of a hot-button issue today, and he talks about immigration and kindness being a lost virtue. So, possibly. But first, Ben is the kind of obnoxious jackass who would respond with, "That's not technically what I said," every time someone fell an inch out of line in paraphrasing him, so I have no issue holding him to that same standard. And second, Gunn's comments don't necessarily have to insinuate illegal immigration. A lot of this current issue has to do with how we look at and treat immigrants in general, including using illegals as an umbrella term to cover them all, at least by insinuation. So when Ben hears Gunn say immigrants and goes straight to illegal immigrants, he's kind of proven the point, isn't he?
Gunn acknowledged the movie's themes may be interpreted differently across political groups, especially considering the nationwide unrest around immigration. However, Gunn stands by the ideals embedded in Superman and added he doesn't care if anyone takes offense. Yes, it plays differently, but it's about human kindness. And obviously there will be jerks out there who are just not kind and will take it as offensive just because it is about kindness.
And as if to prove this point too, Ben makes a video being one of them.
But screw them. And then he says, yes, it's about politics, but on another level, it's about morality. I do not understand the necessity for all of these Hollywood folks to undercut the pitch of their own film before it even comes out. It's insane. It's totally insane.
Gunn's really not undercutting his movie, or at least I don't see him doing that. He's not being that heavy-handed, and I don't see him saying anything that would offend huge parts of the population. He's just saying he doesn't care about people who are perpetually angry about nothing, or, it seems by implication, internet dorks who perform expressions of anger for attention. So Ben's kind of telling on himself when he says that's so divisive that it's going to undercut a movie. It tells me, anyway, that he lives in such a tight little bubble that he thinks the broader population is as offended by and angry at weird things like he is. Or maybe, more likely, he's just feigning shock so he can come off as condescending instead of upset. Either way, not a good look. Now, after this, he goes on this boring rant about Superman being about truth, justice, and the American way.
By the way, David Corenswet did the exact same thing. Corenswet refused to say truth, justice, and the American way in a recent interview. Instead, he said truth, justice, and all that good stuff because he doesn't want to say the American way. The reality that Hollywood is so far to the left that they cannot take a core piece of Americana and just say it's about America. This has been a problem since basically after the original Christopher Reeve series. Every single iteration of Superman that's been made since then has avoided truth, justice, and the American way.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Truth, justice, and the American way was not always a motto of the Superman property. It started as just truth and justice, and the American way was tacked on shortly after the U.S. entered World War II. And even then, it was kind of this off and on thing, with the motto sometimes being things like truth, justice, and freedom, or truth, tolerance, and justice. So it's pretty clear that the American way is not inherently tied to Superman. It doesn't make him a core piece of Americana that's about America. It's a relic of a time when popular media was used to stir patriotic fervor, first against the Axis powers and then against communists. And yes, it was revived at various times, I think famously in the Christopher Reeve movies, but that depended a lot on just how the phrase landed at any particular time period and just general waves of nostalgia. For Ben to act like that was always Superman's model until modern wokists came and just tried to erase it is as stupidly wrong as trying to say that, I don't know, under God was always in the Pledge of Allegiance, or there was this time when everybody always only said Merry Christmas instead of Happy Holidays. And Ben might as well be saying one of the other two things here, because none of this has anything to do with concern for the quality of the Superman property or the upcoming movie. He's just using a rhetorical trick that's as old as time, and that is appealing to this old mythical time in American history where every decent person used specific terminology to refer to things, and so everybody now who deviates from that terminology is somehow anti-America or hates American. Basically, he's trying to assure his little core audience of regressives that they're the only true Americans and that everybody else doesn't belong and hates America and stuff, obviously. And he's going to make this pretty explicit as he goes on.
Because they just refuse to acknowledge the American way is good, that the American way is in fact unique. And this lies at the root of a leftist worldview. That leftist worldview is astonishingly anti-American. It really is, this hardcore left worldview that says that America is somehow uniquely bad.
And there we go. Everything to Ben Shapiro fits this dichotomy between overt nationalistic jingoism and just hating your own country. You know, if you're not one, you're the other, right? Well, wrong. The American way is not as inherently good or bad as any other country's way. It's a meaningless statement anyway that you really can't define by anything other than just nebulous sentiment. It's totally pointless. So not using the term doesn't mean you hate the country you're referring to. It might just mean that you have a realistic understanding of what that country or any country is, that all countries do good and bad things, and that fetishizing a national identity is one of the shallowest forms of artistic expression imaginable. Or it might not even be that. The person might not care that much and might just have an intuitive understanding that the insert country's name's way is anachronistic and meaningless. Or maybe it's just as simple as knowing that now you have to appeal to an international market and stamping our country as best all over everything is just not great from a pragmatic perspective. Maybe this is just capitalism. Capitalism, Ben, aren't you a fan of that? But of course, no such nuance exists in the minds of talking heads like Ben Shapiro. Or if it does, they sure can't express it to their audience. Because their core way of keeping people in line is to draw this hard division between drooling zombified nationalism on one hand and being anti-American and hating your country on the other. Mr. Gunn, are you or have you ever been affiliated with a communist party?
So if there is a comic book character who is built on the goodness of America, which is what Superman really is about.
Superman is about the goodness of America? That's a strange take. But it really gets at the heart of what's going on here. Ben Shapiro claims that he doesn't like his entertainment preachy. He doesn't want to go to a Superman movie that lectures him about immigration or whatever like that. But the alternative to him is to turn it into a pro-America movie, I guess. So he milks this archaic 80-year-old phrase for all it's worth, or just shoehorns in America because he wants to, Because, the issue isn't that he doesn't want his entertainment to be preachy. It's that it wants it to be preachy in ways that he likes. This is pretty transparent, right? I don't know, Ben's such a serious person. He continues with this arbitrary labeling of goodness as American goodness for a shockingly long time. Well, not shocking because, we know who we're listening to.
If Superman is an immigration story, for those who are not familiar with the origin story of Superman, who comes from the planet Krypton and then lands in America.
Or more to the point, he lands on Earth. That's the point being explicitly made by the story, right? He's going to Earth to interact with and be a help to humans. Not so much talk about him flying straight to the US because it's such an exceptional country. His ship just happened to, land in the country of the publication and its audience. I mean, Ben's not wrong when he says that Superman lands in America, but his emphasis,
And then is brought up in a Midwestern household on a farm by his adoptive parents and integrated into true American values, and then goes to Metropolis and brings his sort of country values to the big city where crime is rife and where everybody is too cynical and sophisticated. And the whole point of Superman is that he's bringing these kind of classic American values to the big city.
Again, what's with him making everything about America and being American? I mean, dumb question, we know what he's up to and why, but still. If Superman was shaped by his small-town upbringing, which he probably was to some degree, that didn't make his upbringing inherently American. It made his upbringing small-town. And even then, is Smallville meant to be a place for him to pick up true American values? Or small-town values or anything like that? Maybe, depending on the storyline, there's probably something to the idea that he was shaped by his family upbringing, of course, but then also the kind of town he grew up in. But I don't think it's that one-dimensionally straightforward. For one, Clark's small-town upbringing made him as naive as it made him wholesome. And a lot of this is just a practical storytelling element if you're going to tell the tale of an orphaned alien. When he crash lands, he needs to do it out in the middle of nowhere, and Smallville gives him a place to grow up in obscurity before bursting onto the big scene in the city. There's a reason why UFO sightings tend to happen in remote hillbilly territory. Of course, there are going to be some thematic subtextual reasons for this, and those are going to vary author by author because, comic book properties are long evolving things and they change depending on who's writing them and what storyline we're in and stuff like that. So I can't claim that I know everything about what the Superman story is trying to suggest about Smallville. But here's the thing. For that same reason, neither can Ben Shapiro. And my core thing is not that I'm saying he's wrong and that I know exactly what Superman means and he doesn't. I'm just trying to say that he's throwing way too big a fit over trying to nail down one specific meaning to the story. A lot rests in his mind on how he reads this, or at least that's the performance he's giving his audience. I mean, he even goes so far as to say that Superman was integrated into true American values. Like, come on, dude. Do we really think that America is that big a part of who Superman was and of just the theme of the story? Like, if Superman had happened to crash land in, say, Sudan or India or Russia or something like that, in a small town there, would those small town values be total trash because they aren't American values? I don't know, the plainest reading just seems to be that he grew up in a small town, and to whatever extent that upbringing shaped him, it was the small town part of it, not the nationalist part of it. Jeez, this is so stupid. Why am I even talking about this? I mean, even given him crash landing in small town USA, it seemed like a lot depended on him getting picked up by kindly farmers like the Kents and not, say, the town drunk or angry bigots, ignorant conspiracy theorists. Small towns are full of those kinds of people in America as probably everywhere else. So, is it really the small town, Ben? Was that what made this work? It seems like there was a lot of luck in who Superman got picked up by even within Smallville, and that maybe there are kindly farmers in small towns in other countries. But no, Ben says, American small towns are just basically universally good places because they're American places, and they are the places that his arbitrary sense of American values came from. True American values. And look, I'm no Superman scholar, but it seems like in all the stories I've seen anyway, his trip to Earth is cast in terms of his interactions with humans. He's superior to them, and so he is supposed to use his great strength and inclination toward good to help them. And sure, the Kent's upbringing helped make Superman who he was. But it isn't all he was. It was a piece of the puzzle, and I've definitely never seen it tied to American identity. But that's kind of what Ben's phrasing suggests, that Superman landed in the US as a blank slate and was turned into a good person from the ground up by being exposed to and accepting American values. I mean, he doesn't say it in as many words, and I'm sure if called out on it, he would backpedal out of the insinuation he's making, but that's the implication of his true American values phrasing. And the problem is that this idea does not exist in the vacuum of a Superman discussion, nor is it meant to. Superman is just a fictional hypothetical, and so the real idea at play here is that a Latino or a Pacific Islander or an African who comes to our shores does so with no internal values of their own, or at least no good ones, no worthwhile ones anyway. And so they're basically incomplete until they adopt the values that we so graciously bestow upon them. And because American values or the American way are totally nebulous concepts with no real meaning, what this does is it subjects immigrants to constant judging for approval by every ignorant racist out there who has their own idea of what America should look like and whether that immigrant is contributing to it. Whether they're being integrated well enough. Basically, Superman is being held up as one of the good immigrants who did it right by integrating, and so we're judging all the rest of them by that standard. It's really gross. But it's also just incomprehensibly stupid when applied to the Superman story. Like, imagine Jor-El, this brilliant scientist from the planet Krypton that is like light years ahead of us in terms of scientific and social progress, sending his son to go live on a backwater planet and being like, I sure hope that Kal-El lands on the one exceptional country on that planet that will just really raise him right. Train him up in American values so he doesn't become like a communist or an African or something like that. Then he sighs and looks at the American flag through a superpowered telescope, only able to wish that Krypton had achieved American values like America had. Now, I know Ben's not saying this exact thing happened, but it seems like some version of this is demanded by his take on the story, right? It just seems so out of line with Superman's world building and shows how outlandish Ben's expression of American nationalism is becoming. It really is sounding like a parody of itself at this point.
It's a riff on how New York kind of sucks in many ways, actually.
No, I don't think that's what's going on here. Big cities like New York were the original market for these comics. They were kind of a niche product, and it wasn't easy or profitable to distribute them out to rural areas. That's why a lot of these original comic brands were so city-centered. They were writing about what their readers would relate to. So when Ben says,
it's a riff on how New York kind of sucks,
he was suggesting they were trashing the place their target audience lived after setting it there for their benefit to begin with. It's complete nonsense. He's just projecting his personal attitude toward big Democrat cities onto the story.
Superman, the original, is very much about how the values of America are farm-bred and farm-born. Right? His moral center, his moral compass, Superman, is on the farm from his parents.
Yeah, Superman got a lot of his values from his adopted parents. Duh. But as I've said before, Ben's reading way too much into this story when he tries to find this thread straight from Superman's values to his adopted parents to small-town values to American values, to the point that America has one true sense of values that came straight off of farms. Sure, Ben. I mean, whatever sentimentality these stories might have about small-town America, we have to remember these were written about big cities for big city readers. So rural America, the small town and all that stuff, I think it was kind of othered in the minds of the writers and their audience. Not that that's a totally bad thing, but it was kind of maybe seen as quaint, something Superman came out of as he came toward his true destiny in the big city. I don't know. I'm not trying to be totally dismissive of the idea. I'm just saying that obviously Ben's one-dimensional view of small towns as being totally idealized to the point of being considered the true source of American values or the only source of American values is just really, really silly.
That's why he takes the name Clark Kent. He's an immigrant who assimilates to American values.
Okay, so now we're saying that he took on the name Clark Kent as an act of assimilation, of trying to conform to American culture and American values? No. Not only is Ben reading a lot of Ben's personal agenda into the story, but it flies directly in the face of the text. Clark Kent was Superman's secret identity. Whenever he took it on, at least as an adult, it was to hide who he really was. He didn't extinguish his original identity. He didn't even give up his original name. He often went by Kal-El, at least around people who knew him, and he considered himself a Kryptonian, maintained a secret hideaway patterned after his home planet, and accessed and was guided by archived information from his birth parents based on the knowledge and values of his original culture. In short, to whatever extent we want to dive into this metaphor about immigration, Superman is about the double life of immigrants, about the struggle to do enough to fit in without giving up who you are, and about the parts of yourself you have to hide in the process. Now, I know we could go too far in trying to make the story about that, and that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to point out how far off the rails Ben is when he says that Superman overhauled his identity to that of Clark Kent as an act of assimilation. I think this is where Ben is just most obviously showing his cards in terms of reworking the story to make it a metaphor for his right-wing xenophobia.
And then brings those classic American values to the big city, where he has to use them to defend the big city from enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, the original Superman is literally punching
Bad German.
in the face. In the comics, he literally punches
Bad German.
in the face.
Okay, so first, saying that the original Superman punched Bad German is not exactly false, but it's pushing it a bit. Superman first punched Bad German in 1940, which is just shy of 2 years after the character was created. So very early, but does this make him the original Superman? I don't know. The character is constantly evolving, so where exactly do you draw that line? I don't even care about that, not in the least. The point is just how much Ben is trying to slip under the radar by being a little bit free and loose with semantics. In his very earliest adventures, and I know this is kind of semantically loose too, but I am going to trace this back to the first comic, Superman was challenging the status quo to the point of being a bit of an agitator. One might even say he was a little woke. The very first comic had him violently and insistently breaking into a governor's mansion to get a woman off death row and intervening in domestic violence. And all this is framed not in any kind of nationalistic or American terms, but of Superman being a champion of the oppressed and devoted to helping those in need. And even if we assume that there was no wartime propaganda element to this Superman punching Bad German in the face thing, and thus that it wasn't really a, real iteration of his character, this still fits the theme of standing up for the oppressed and the underdog and stuff like that, right? So Ben taking even this, even if this is a true part of Superman's character, and even if it did trace back to the beginning, and trying to turn it into a nationalistic American thing instead of just a standing up for the underdog thing, it's kind of gross and just shows how much he's trying to twist the story and where he's coming from, I guess. I mean, a lot of Superman's earliest enemies are corrupt American politicians and big business owners. He openly advocates for workers' rights to the point of forcing owners to work under the same conditions they're subjecting their employees to. Now, yes, I know that everybody wants to attach Superman to their side. They want to see their values in him and see him as a reflection of or endorsement of their values. But the progressive social justice themes are pretty overt and even heavy-handed in Superman's earliest appearances, to the point that I think all you would have to do is make a 100% literal, totally faithful adaptation of them into a movie, and if you didn't tell Ben Shapiro what it was, he would just assume that that movie was, just totally loaded with modern wokeness that's corrupting the property. It's really silly. He doesn't get what Superman is, or he doesn't care what it is, and he's just trying to turn it into his own thing. At the very least, describing this as some kind of nationalistic property where Superman is fighting for American values in the American way and, trying to defend our country against domestic and foreign enemies and stuff like that, he's missing the point, or he doesn't want to get the point. I mean, there's a lot of room to read semantics into that. Who are America's foreign and domestic enemies really? But the fact that he's going so far against the American power structure, well, all power structures, but this includes the American power structure, against its corrupt politicians, against its business owners. I don't know. This doesn't feel like it has the rah, conservative status quo affirming thing that Ben wants it to.
So, the attempt to separate Superman off from America is just a demonstration by the cultural left of how much they dislike America.
Yeah, there is no attempt to separate Superman from America. Ben's just making this weird half-hearted attempt to glue Superman to America. To co-opt this character who was often very progressive, especially in his earliest iterations, and who, over time, to be fair, ran all over the map in terms of themes and characterization and stuff like that, and claim that he's this one-dimensional symbol of the conformity Ben expects out of others. That's all this video is. Just an expression of Ben's totalitarian thinking. When we think about what we watched, it was rarely ever about Superman at all. He just had this itch to make some comments about things James Gunn had said, and to yell at clouds about how the Superman of the movie isn't as American as he imagines or pretends he'd been before. But there's another, even way clearer thing that shows how much this video just isn't about Superman at all. And that is that we're only 3.5 minutes into this 12-minute video, and he's totally done talking about Superman. The rest of it is basically just griping about New York mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani. Like, maybe title your video about him, huh, Ben? He complains that Mamdani's not a good immigrant and doesn't love America enough, and then trails off into these familiar right-wing tangents about how liberals blame America for everything. And, America's not the only country that colonized and took over other people, but why does it get so much hate when everybody did it? Even questions Mamdani's racial identity. Good to see Ben still keeping it classy. He literally utters the name Superman once in the last 3/4 of this video, and that's just to say that Mamdani wasn't as good an immigrant as he is. Real cool, Ben. It's just stupid and pointless and typical of him. Super, super petty. Basically, it's just an expression of his dick-headed bigotry, and I don't know, just kind of shows how totally unserious and misinformed Ben Shapiro is. That is assuming he's not just clearly, obviously, willfully lying. Anyway, have a good day, everybody.